let me bring to the stage Michael Pollan. Michael? Welcome.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
You can sit right here. So, before we knew who was going to be our next president, you took care of his food policy. You kind of outlined it in the New York Times, which pretty much guaranteed that the current administration didn't read it. So, can you summarize the kind of core idea in that piece?
Yeah, I can try. My premise was that, look, neither candidate talked very much about food policy since they left Iowa. And candidates always say really stupid things in Iowa about food. Because you can't get elected president without bowing down in Iowa before crop subsidies and ethanol. But after that, they don't talk about food. But my argument to the next president was that they would find themselves having to deal with our food system if they hoped to deal with the three of the big issues they did talk about: energy independence, climate change, and the healthcare crisis. Because as soon as you start working on those issues and attempt to get anywhere, to reduce our oil consumption, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and to curb healthcare costs, you discover that food is a key to doing that, and that food is the shadow problem, the food system, the way we're feeding ourselves. And so you're going to need to deal with it. And to put the issue in the broadest terms, is that over the last 50 years or so, for very good reasons, but not reasons with kind of poor forethought, we transformed our food system into another fossil fuel industry, so that we're using a fifth of the fossil fuel we burn to grow food, to process food, to eat food. Between 20 and 35% of greenhouse gases are produced by the food system, partly as a result of all the fossil fuel that goes into it. And four of the most expensive problems that the healthcare system deals with, are chronic diseases linked to the diet. I'm talking about heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and about 40% of cancers. All can be traced to the American diet. So that you're not going to reduce healthcare costs unless you deal with the catastrophe that is the American diet. You're not going to deal with climate change unless you reduce the impact of agriculture and actually turn agriculture into part of the solution on climate change, because there's enormous potential to turn those 750 million acres of ag land into a huge carbon sink. And you're not going to significantly reduce oil use until you get us off of eating oil and spewing greenhouse gas. So that's the basic idea. I was trying to get them to pay attention to the issue, and then laying out a series of proposals at every level, at the farm, in the marketplace, and at the level of us eaters.
Right. Now, do you think anyone heard this?
Well, yeah, I do. I know that it was heard. There's a very interesting interview that Barack Obama did with Joe Klein about a week before the election. And he quoted somewhat extensively from the article and indicated that he had...
I mean, he read it.
He read it. And right there is like half
Hope.
the battle. I mean, you know, that we have a president now who actually will read articles. This is big. It makes what we do feel, suddenly you feel less like you're howling from the margins. Hello, there's something that you need to know about, to the idea that you're participating in a conversation.
Now, if I could boil down sort of your suggestion, because you didn't just sort of say, man, people have got to stop waking up and having a Slurpee. You had some proposals, and if I could boil them all down to one thing, it was eat sunshine.
Yeah. Basically.
So how do we eat sunshine?
Basically, if the problem is that we're eating oil, we need to switch and put the food system back on a diet of contemporary sunshine. Now, this is very plausible, because if you remember that
it sounds kind of 70s.
It does sound kind of 70s, I know. But remember that every calorie of food you have ever eaten is ultimately the product of photosynthesis, right? The original solar technology. Only photosynthesis can take the energy of the sun and turn it into usable carbohydrates, usable energy for us. So the potential is there. And the challenge is reorganizing the systems, coming up with ways of growing food, certain kind of complex rotations on the farm, changing the set of assumptions, putting animals back on farms, getting them out of feedlots. There's a whole lot of very specific things you can do to kind of wring the oil out of the system and relocalize the food system to the extent that you can. You can't do that completely at this point. We've planted cities in places that can't grow food. We've plowed over, the parts of New Jersey that once fed New York City. But to the extent you can, if you work to wring the fossil fuel out of the food system, you will find that you're reducing greenhouse gas, reducing oil consumption, and improving the public health.
Now, why do you think it is that, how did we get to the point where, what is it, 60% of Americans are either overweight or obese? Mm-hmm. It seems to go counter to the idea that we, as in this country, really believe in, which is, independent choice, independent informed choice. How did we get to the point where we have a system that seemingly encourages the, as you put it, the catastrophe of the American diet?
Well, because we subsidize certain kinds of calories in our diet and we don't subsidize others. So the big crops that we subsidize are corn and soy. All the corn we're encouraging farmers to grow in these giant monocultures all across the Midwest get turned into cheap feedlot meat and high fructose corn syrup. And then we subsidize soy. And all that soy gets turned into, by and large, hydrogenated soy oil, in which all the fast food gets fried. Those two kinds of calories alone now represent, and they're the least healthy calories you could possibly eat. I mean, hydrogenated soy oil is pretty lethal. It's full of trans fats. And high fructose corn syrup is, is sugar. And, but that represents a third of the American diet right now. It would not if we didn't make those kind of calories so cheap. So it's not a result of informed choice. It's the result of making choices from the options presented to you by agricultural policy. So on the one hand, you have a president signing farm bills that subsidize high fructose corn syrup and hydrogenated soy oil, while another part of the government is decrying the fact that we have 60% overweight or obesity. It's an absolute contradiction. And the challenge, essentially, is to align our agricultural policies with our energy and climate change policies and with our public health policies.
Now, standing in the way of that.
Oh, yeah, let me tell you about that.
Is an extraordinary sort of alliance of, you've got your Monsantos, your Krafts, your McDonald's, you have companies that have been built that I think, knowing a lot of people at those companies, as I know you do, are well-meaning, mm-hmm. believe that they're doing good, but are certainly not eager to help anybody eat sunshine.
No, because the business model of the American food system is start with the cheapest possible raw ingredients, corn, soy, wheat, and process it as much as you can to make complex value-added food products. So that the more you process a food, you can't make money selling oatmeal. You begin to make money selling Cheerios. So you're adding, to 5 cents worth of oats, you're getting a $4 product. You make even more money selling Honey Nut Cheerio cereal bars with the layer of synthetic milk in the middle. And then you're making serious money on your oats. And then you make even more money than that, the next iteration of these cereal straws that our children are supposed to drink milk through. Check them out, they're in the stores now. So from a business point of view, you make more money the more you process food. From a biological point of view, that food gets less nutritious the more you process it. So you basically have a fundamental contradiction between the logic of biology for the human body and on the land and the logic of the food industry.
Well, how do you not get depressed? Because I'm kind of a little depressed right now. I mean, look, you live in Berkeley, I live in Marin.
I know, we live in a food bubble.
Right. We're suspicious of Whole Foods.
Right, I know.
So it seems like an extraordinarily large task to move a system as you know, entrenched.
Yeah, and we saw that in Obama got some grief for saying anything nice about this article, actually. The farmers in Iowa, or Charles Grassley, their representative, Republican representative, accused him, by connecting agriculture to the healthcare crisis and to the energy crisis, accused him of blaming the farmer. So you see, you've got to, you know, how you present these ideas.
But in your article, one of the things I liked that struck me, and this may just because it sounds like such an elegant solution, so I fell in love with it, was the idea that we actually need not only more farmers, we need smarter farmers,
yeah.
and we need to repopulate the sort of concept of the family farm that is a polyculture, where
yeah.
you have chickens and cows, and the cows are, you know, doing what cows do on the fields where the plants grow, so that you have this sort of, as you put it, polyculture effect. So it strikes me that with just the right touch of marketing, you could actually sell this as entirely farm-friendly. It's just not agribusiness friendly.
That's right. Well,
right?
I don't think the farmers really believe what Charles Grassley said, and that, you know, to criticize a production system is not to criticize a farmer who is forced to adopt that production system, because that's all the grain elevator will buy from him is more corn and soy. But I think you're right in terms. First, to do this, the biggest challenge is not technological. The biggest challenge is we don't have enough hands on the land to farm this way. Solar farming is not turning back the clock. It's very sophisticated. It involves figuring out relationships between species such that the waste of one becomes the food of another, such that they're basically creating a closed system that doesn't need a lot of inputs. We need to rethink what a farmer is. We have denigrated farmers for 100 years in this country as not being smart, as you know, the buffoon in you know, Beverly Hillbillies. I mean, you just go back and look at the cultural image of farmers. We have to recognize that the farmers that will lead us will learn how to, you know, sequester carbon in their farms are the new green jobs, are really important green jobs, that they need a deep knowledge of ecology, entomology, soil science, and they are really will be at the cutting edge of coming up with these new biological systems. And we don't even appreciate how sophisticated those systems are, because there's no intellectual property attached to them. And that's another challenge that the people in this room will be hard-pressed to figure out, although I challenge them to do it. How do you make money creating solar food production systems?
Well, that's why I wanted you to be here.
Now I get it. I didn't know why I was here.
Well, over the last couple of days, we've seen a lot of things that, it strikes me, pull together toward the same, you know, thread. For example, you mentioned in the article a culture of ignorance and indifference in eaters, and your last book was sort of about an eater's manifesto. But we've seen a number of presentations here of mobile devices that, you know, you can scan over a product on a retail shelf, and they bring up information about that product, where it came from, what's its nutritional value, what's its use of energy, is it local, is it processed, and so on and so forth. It strikes me that the web has a lot to do with empowering the consumer to the point where they can make informed choices that might start to move this ship in the right direction.
I think you're absolutely right. There are two ways that the internet can help. One is making the food system more transparent. One of the problems is that the food system is completely opaque. People don't know where their food comes from. And if they could see into the feedlots and slaughterhouses that I've been to researching this book, they would change the way they eat, because you really lose your appetite when you see that kind of thing. So I look forward to a handheld device or a second barcode in the supermarket where you can see, and food companies are required to let you see, into the kitchen where your food is being prepared, which is to say, not just the calorie counts and the nutritional information, but the feedlot, the slaughterhouse, the diet of the animals you're eating, that all of it is available. Not everybody's going to want to look at it, but the fact that it is available will have a dramatic effect. You would not need Proposition 2 if, when you bought eggs, a live shot of the barn where the eggs were produced came up on your screen. the system would take care of all those problems. People would not want to put those pictures up.
This was the premise of the Omnivore's dilemma, right?
Transparency.
Where great books are always this way. There's just a simple idea, which is, how did this meal get made, right? And then you walk through 4 meals. What needs to happen, either from a policy standpoint or a leadership standpoint, the leaders of not only our government, but the leaders of our business world, for our culture to want to know that? You know what I'm asking?
Well, that's happening. I mean,
besides you going on Oprah, which
which hasn't happened yet. That is happening. There is enormous concern out there about the food supply. There are doubts about its safety, questions about its provenance. The story of the food from China coming in and the problems with that has sensitized the public. People are looking for alternatives. I mean, that is why you see 20% a year growth in organic food. That is why you see burgeoning farmers markets. People are ready for something different. Yeah, it's still kind of elite, but these movements always start there, and it will be democratized. So I don't doubt that there is significant consumer demand. I don't expect the industrial food system to go away. A farmer I interviewed for the book, Joel Salatin, who's one of these great solar farmers, said, it's not going to be a revolution, it's going to be a reformation. Once upon a time, if you wanted to, as a Christian, experience the divinity, you had to go into that one church, the Catholic Church. There was no alternative. And that's the industrial food system. That's the supermarket. Now we have a reformation underway. There are alternative food chains coming up all over the place. Luther has arrived. It's people like Joel Salatin. And they have nailed up their ideas. And so now you have organic and you have local.
A lot of people died during that period.
It was a difficult period. But the fact is, the Catholic Church still exists, but it's a whole lot smaller and less dominant than it was.
Is Alice Waters like Joan of Arc?
Maybe she's Luther. Yeah, she might be the Luther. So, the market will drive a lot of this. The market is looking for alternatives, and the people who put good alternatives in front of them are doing quite well. The other thing the internet can do, though, is form communities of people locally. A lot of people don't know how to find local food in any given environment. And there is, so they're forced, they can only go to the supermarket to get fed, even though there are alternatives all around them. So finding good web tools to form those communities of people who want another kind of food, who want to buy beef directly from a farmer that they can see how it's grown, I think the web has already contributed to that a lot. You have a series of websites where you can type in your zip code and it'll tell you who's doing interesting local food near you. So there is great potential. But the hard part still is the whole food industry is based on selling farmers inputs, right? Genetically modified, patented seed, pesticides. And what we need are less products for farmers than processes. And the challenge is, how do you make a brilliant crop rotation, okay? 6 different species, animals and plants, in a rotation that eliminates the need for nitrogen, which is fossil fuel fertilizer. No one's going to own that rotation. So where's the incentive going to come to create it, to do the research?
Well, there are a lot of venture capitalists here in the room. And when I read your article, being an entrepreneur as well, my sort of entrepreneurial spidey senses tingled. I didn't know enough to know what to do in terms of the company to be started. There was one idea I had, but then they applied to the Launchpad and won it, Good Guide. And it's a company that is just all about exactly this, just providing information about things. Those things could include packages of food in a context that allows people to make informed choices. So do you see, we had John Doerr here a couple of days ago, and he was talking about how the energy industry is a 10x opportunity in terms of entrepreneurial, sort of open, greenfield. Like, go do it. Go reform the energy industry, right? It's a much bigger industry than the internet industry. How big is the food industry?
It's the biggest industry in the country, when you count it all. It's tremendous.
So there must be huge opportunities to...
There are. I think
if you look at Whole Foods ain't a small company anymore.
No, although it's getting smaller at the moment.
There's not many that are getting bigger, except for Walmart.
That's right. That's right. And that, I think, is a big challenge. I mean, we are so invested in cheap food. And it's the same as cheap energy. I mean, all the problems are comparable. People don't want to give up cheap gas, even though we all know we need to give up cheap gas in order to move into the future. We need to give up cheap food in order to move into the future. Cheap food is not cheap. It's incredibly expensive at the level of energy use, climate change, the brutality to workers, the brutality to animals. It's
like
not
cheap calories equals expensive health care.
Well, exactly. And so, but you've externalized all these costs, and that's where policy can help. And that's where the government has to change the, it's a game. I mean, the food industry is a game played according to a set of rules written by the government, specifically by the members of the House and Senate agricultural committees, which is dominated by commodity state farmers. And that you need to begin there and change the rules of that political game also. I would just add one cautionary note, and we talked about this when we first talked about my coming, which is as people in the internet world, digital world, get interested in things like energy and food, I think it's important to keep in mind that you're moving from a silicon to a biological world, and that as seductive as the metaphors are, that the genome is software, that kind of thing, which Monsanto is encouraging us all to believe, it isn't really, and that biological systems are really complex and need to be approached with great care. And we've seen this already with ethanol. That spike of enthusiasm from VCs all over the Bay Area in ethanol, which is turning out to be kind of a disaster. And part of the reason is that people didn't look at it in a really contextual way and understand the ecological implications, the fact that if you took all this corn to make ethanol here, that land would be cut down in Malaysia to make up for that corn land you've lost, right. And so that the net effect on climate change was negative. I encourage anyone moving into this space to have people alongside them who know how to think ecologically. Not even Monsanto hired ecologists when they started re-engineering our food system. And that's turned out not to be a very good thing. So learning how to think ecologically is critically important. And there are people out there who can do it, but they're usually out of this conversation.
Are you concerned that the price of gas has gone from $4 or over $4 back down under $3? Because it struck me that there was one silver lining to the $85 tank of gas, which was that it was forcing the...
What are you driving?
I have 3 kids. It was forcing the United States to start to think about alternatives,
sure.
and perhaps speeding up this transformation.
Think of all the capital that was flowing into energy systems, and a lot of it.
And then Exxon and all these guys were reporting these sort of obscene profits, and you could see almost a populist revolution starting to develop. But now we've seen oil cut in half. Number one, is there some evil cabal that's doing that on purpose? Mm-hmm. And number two, are you worried that's going to mean that we step back to sort of cheap gas and complacency?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a real concern. And we know historically OPEC has reduced oil prices when they felt threatened by alternative energy. This happened in the 70s. I don't know that that's what's going on now. But they understand the threat to their long-term viability of high oil prices. Look, when prices spiked last year, just going back to the food industry, one of the more interesting things that happened was that the price of moving a box of broccoli from the Salinas Valley here in California to the Hunts Point market in New York went from $3 to $10. And when that happened, Tanmora and Antle and several of the other big growers in California started buying agricultural land in New England, because they understood that the future was feeding people growing food a little closer to where it was going to be eaten. They understood where we need to go in terms of re-regionalizing the food system. What are they going to do now?
Yeah.
If the price goes back to $3?
Goes back to $3. You have a great sort of anecdote in the piece about, I think it was a Danish a recipe for sugar cookies. It's like a lot cheaper to transport the information about how to make it between the countries as opposed to exporting the cookie from one place to another.
Well, what we do is we have some ridiculous...
That to me sounded very web-like, right? It's like,
yeah.
You know.
Well, it is. I mean, we now export sugar cookies to Denmark, and we also import sugar cookies from Denmark. And Herman Daly, economist, said, wouldn't it be more efficient to swap recipes? Indeed.
That's kind of what the web's for. We have time for a couple questions if anyone wants to ask Michael a question. Yeah, can bring up the mic.
Sorry, I'm not tall enough. So I think the point is that cheap calories that people at the poverty line eat are pretty much toxic now. So my question is, what did people at the poverty line eat 40, 50 years ago, or did they starve to death, which is just as toxic, and how do we move them, if we're going to transition to what's arguably a more expensive way of producing food, what happens to them during the next 10 or 20 years while that happens?
Well, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think several things have to happen. I mean, the fact is that it is rational, if you don't have a lot of money, to buy those calories of cheap processed food. It is the smart thing to do. If you have that $85 a week that food stamps gives you for a family of 4, you would be foolish to buy anything else because you need energy. What we need to do is change the rules of the game so that the broccoli and the carrots can compete with the junk food in the middle of the store. And so there's a policy solution there. We also need to take that, you know, if you're a food stamp recipient now, you have a credit card, an EBT card, and that you can swipe. Well, we have to have readers in farmers markets. And we also need to figure out a way to make that card buy more produce and less soda. And that will be, people will accuse you for advocating that of moralizing about people's food choices. And people say to me, well, if you can buy junk food, why shouldn't poor people be able to buy junk food? And I think that's a question we need to grapple with. But what if there was an extra increment on that card that was only redeemable at your farmer's market? And you could buy all the junk you want up to that $85, but there was another $20 that you could only spend at the farmer's market. Well, that would accomplish several goals. It would help build up these local food economies very quickly and put more nutritious food in the grocery bags of people without a lot of money.
I like that idea.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you for Omnivore's Dilemma. It was one of my favorite books of '08.
Thank you.
It's so eye-opening, and I encourage everyone here to read it, and I wasn't paid to say that. My question relates to kind of this, there's kind of two things going on with Web 2.0. I'm closer to all the people who I know around the world, but then with what we see with the food industry, I'm further from my food. So I was wondering, where is the opportunity to kind of, how do we localize food behaviors? And make this more of an observation than a question, but it seems like there's a correlation there between people very far from me becoming close and food very far from me becoming close. Yeah, well, you know, the good thing about this food landscape we now all confront is that there really are alternatives. There is another way you can eat. You don't have to wait for the Farm Bill to get rewritten. If you have money, there are other ways you can eat, and people are discovering them. I don't know if you've been to a farmer's market lately, but they are one of the most interesting places to be in America right now. They're not just a place where money is exchanged for food. They have become the new public square. People go to the farmer's market to politic, to hear music, to meet farmers, and they've become really vital. A sociologist did a study, and he found that people have 10 times as many conversations at the farmer's market than they do at the supermarket. People go there even, you know, Ferry Plaza is packed on Saturday by tourists who can't possibly be bringing broccoli in their carry-on luggage home. They're going for the experience of it. So food is an opportunity for creating community. It is about a lot more than calories we can ingest. And food, by the way, has always been about a lot more than providing energy. It has been about our social lives, about our identities, about how we knit our family together. And so the rediscovery of all those values and those pleasures that come out of where you shop for food, how you cook food, and who you sit down to eat it with,
These are, cultural values that, in the case of our children, I think we need to teach again. And I think that it really is the answer to your question, that this has to happen in the primary schools. Right now, we're teaching our children to be fast food eaters. We're actually feeding them chicken nuggets and tater tots at these kind of low-end fast food chains that we've installed in our public schools. You're not going to get the right habits that you're looking for. You're certainly not going to get the right health habits. So I think it really has to start there with spending more money on the school lunch program, teaching kids how to grow food, how to cook food, and how to eat food. And if that sounds paternalistic, we're teaching them how to eat food right now.
One last question. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. I think you actually just touched on what I was going to bring up, which is that there needs to be a government change and an industry change, and we need to take gasoline out and put some back in. But it needs to be mainly a cultural change, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Kids I know today, dinners aren't being, they're not at the table anymore. They're in front of the TV. Breakfast isn't eaten together anymore. And so you bring up the farmers markets. Maybe it needs to be much more of a sea change from the bottom up.
Well, it's why one of my proposals was suggesting to the new president that he use the bully pulpit, the example of the White House. And so I've suggested that they rip out 5 acres of that gorgeous, pristine White House lawn and plant an organic garden. And he appoint in addition to a White House chef, and I suggest he appoint someone like Alice Waters to that job, that he appoint a White House farmer to elevate the role of farming, to exemplify the kind of solar farming we're talking about, so that when you're watching that, John King CNN stand-up, in the background is not this, Miracle Grow green carpet, but you actually have a working farm. I mean, wouldn't that be great?
So if you are called, will you serve?
No. I would be so bad. White House farmer, maybe. I wouldn't mind doing the gardener job. I don't want to be Secretary of Agriculture. That's my idea.
Well, please join me in
hell.
thanking Michael Pollan for coming to Web 2L.